Okay, let's talk about rendering this eye. We'll focus in on her active eye, and let's see if we can bring it a little bit more to completion. So I'm going to be using a double-sided chalk holder. I've got a lighter red chalk and a little bit of a deeper red chalk, which is how the drawing's been made so far. So you might notice two tones of red chalk in this drawing, and it's just simply the darker one and the red and the lighter one. I use them intuitively. I don't have a real formula for when I switch off. Although it's obvious that where it's darker, like in the mouth and the nostril, we definitely have to lean on the darker stuff. And in softer areas where there's just a little bit of tone, we really don't need to go into the darker. We can just use the lighter, more earthy, tomatoey red. And then I've got white chalk here, just a piece of white chalk in a little tiny charcoal holder. That's just from my Carbothello pencil. When they break off, I stick them in these. Or if you don't have a small one like this, you can also just stick it in a drafting lead holder, and it'll fit in there, and you can keep using it. So to get started here, I'm going to have a couple things handy. I think I'll keep a mechanical eraser handy since it's going to get really tight in there. And I'll also keep a kneaded eraser handy. Probably going to want to rely on my blending tools as well. So that'll be a little blender brush for blending white chalk if necessary. And then I have just this kind of mid-sized bristle brush that I'm using to blend the red chalk. And a lot of blending I've done in this drawing, I've just been using my hand too. So there's nothing wrong with using the hand for blending. First thing I'm going to do is place, just for location and for value, for keying the value, I want to place this highlight of white on the rim of the lower eyelid. So just getting that located is helpful. And we've also got some beautiful lights happening on the upper eyelid. Nice highlight up there. Let's prepare the area by taking the kneaded eraser and lifting it out so that we don't mix the white chalk with the reds. I'm just slightly going to hatch in a little bit of white chalk there. We also have a little bit of light coming into the underplane of the brow. A warm light there. I'm going to use a little bit of my cream chalk and hatch that in. Value is most important, though. If you don't have the cream chalk, it doesn't really matter. You can use your white, your regular white, and just get a little bit of a brighter value there. And then let's take it into some deepening of value, some darkening of value. And we're going to notice that I'm shaking the camera a lot. We're going to notice that we want to treat the iris and the eyelash as a team unit. And that's something that I bring up in my lecture on the eye, is trying to keep the eyelash and the iris connected as a common shape. So the moment you separate that eyelash off of the iris and the other darks of the eye, that's the moment the eye always looks too linear and too outlined. So I try to, when I look at the shape of the iris, I try to see it as tonally merging with this eyelash. And it's almost best to go ahead and outline them together. So that comes right out of my lectures on the eye. And I noticed just a little adjustment that I wanted to make in the shape of the eye as I was outlining it, was just that I wanted to sneak it a little bit higher to try to accommodate the rim, the thickness of the rim of that lower eyelid. Doesn't quite fit based on where I wanted the highlight to be. So you can see I'm trying to base the location of this highlight by how far up I go from the infrapalpebral crease. And I'm already pushing it kind of tight. So I don't want to move this up at all. So it tells me I need to maybe sneak my iris up just a little bit. And let's go ahead and bring this whole thing down in value. We'll put our first layer of hatches of darker red chalk right over that. Let's look at the shape here of that upper eyelash. This is the last chance to kind of edit the location or the angle, the tilt, all these things. We can maybe sneak a little bit more accuracy into it. The inner canthus, her inner canthus, has kind of a long linear quality to it. And I want to look and see how far am I supposed to be from this highlight catching the inside of the eye socket here. Because there's the highlight, then there's a little island of light there. And then we begin this inner canthus. So I'm actually squeezing her a little bit there compared to the model. Not enough for it to look like a problem to the viewer, but probably enough to cost me a little bit of likeness, meaning it won't look like her as much. You know, she's a little bit more expansive in there, just a hair. And I have to, you have to ask yourself at this point, how badly do you want the likeness? Do you want to tear up and destroy the drawing? It's important to assess, do I need to capture the likeness in portraiture? And of course, if you're on a commission, then the answer is yes, you have to capture the likeness. Otherwise, they won't be satisfied. But if you're just drawing for yourself and you're practicing drawing the human head, and the emphasis is more on humanness and good drawing, and less on likeness, then let it go. Going in with the lighter red chalk now because the values that I see up here are just simply more delicate in nature. So I want to turn the outside edge of this brow form, give it a little bit of turning. It's turning around this way, and it's also turning under. So we're trying to get that curvature, that double curvature of it. Turn it this way and turn it that way. Let's avoid the hair textures in the eyebrow. I've already talked with a few people about just ignore that brow texture. One of the fastest ways to ruin a good portrait is just to get too quickly involved in the textures of hairs across the portrait. That might be hair on the head, hair in the beard, hair in the eyebrows, hair in the eyelashes. That's a real common one. I see a lot of student drawings where they go for that information right away, almost like right from the get-go, and it honestly looks like kindergarten level drawing to me. And so it's just we realize little hairs like that are very superfluous and very inconsequential when it comes to form. So we're after the bigger forms of the head and the face. And things like hair, so malleable, so subject to variabilities, we want to downplay them as much as possible. The big shadows on this side of the head, so we know the light's coming from here, right? The light comes from like that. And therefore, if the eye is a sphere, and if this were a ball, if we could just replace this with a ball, what would we find? We'd find that this side of the ball is growing dimmer, right? Because it turns away. So we want to turn this whole thing around. We also know that it's a ball. It turns dimmer as it goes under. And of course, we have a big shadow, or not a big one, but we have a major shadow shape here at the infrapalpebral crease. We have slightly dimmer values here along the lower eyelid. This is a great time to remind ourselves of the idea of the white of the eye, the whites of their eyes. And I'm not sure if the famous saying is from the Civil War or from the Revolutionary War, but one of those wars where muskets had to be loaded in order to fire, and it was costly use of time in a battle. And the generals would say to their soldiers, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes," which turned out to be really problematic for portrait artists because, and for students studying portraiture, because these are not white, as you can clearly see when you look at the subject matter. Take a look at Khazaria posing, and we see that the sclera, the so-called white part of the eye, is so far from being white. It's really closer to a mid-tone value gray. So I always joke that the saying should have been, "Don't fire until you see the mid-tone value gray of their eyes." And in the footage and images that we have of Khazaria, you can see that the highlights, the actual refractions of light off the surface of her face, the values there are way brighter than the actual local value of the sclera itself. I'm going to take this white chalk and I'm going to try to find the highlight in the eye. Once I place the chalk, then I'll just spin it to try to create that dot, to bring a little bit of that that sparkle. Often brings a lot of life to the drawing, but you don't want to overdo it. You also don't want to get it in the wrong place. It can quickly look incorrect, and it can change the appearance of the gaze as well. And a lot of times, if you have two sparkles going on, if they're not well balanced, you can cause your portrait to look cross-eyed, or you can cause it to make one eye appear to be looking in a different direction than the other eye. So it's sort of dangerous territory, but it's worth it if you get it right. It adds a lot of life essence to the portrait. Now notice how I'm organizing the whole iris as one common dark. I'm not interested in the finite details inside the eye, and I coach any of my students to avoid lots of detail and texture and information about what's going on in the iris and the pupil, and people get so entranced by all that it really flattens the eye and makes it look way less real than you want it to. Now I put in a pupil just now, but only after I had created a unity across the entire iris. So that's probably all that I will let it be in terms of its details. But remember, we want the eye to be a part of the portrait and part of the head, and it's a ball sunken into an eye socket with fleshy eyelids wrapping around the ball. It's not something that we want to outline. That's the big pitfall that most students make, is they go outlining the eyes, they draw outlines around the eyelids, they draw linear eyelashes, which I haven't done here. You can see I've just organized them as one solid band of form, which then merges to the iris. And we want it to be a form and a structure in space. I'm going to use my pinky and rub that. Feels better now. I'm going to merge this right through, right into the eye. I'm going to pull it across like that. I'm going to deepen the value of the eyebrow because it is a darker value, but I'm not, I don't want you to think I'm drawing hairs right now. I'm just hatching as I normally do anywhere. So it doesn't have anything to do with the hairs. Best policy for so many things is, with so much figurative information, is how would a stone sculptor have to deal with this information? Can they create little hairy hairs on their stone sculpture? Well, they could at the end, but there's so much that has to be done before they could get to that. And so we want to think in those terms too. What's more fundamental? What's more wholesome to the drawing? It's really the shape and the value. That's what does 99% of the work. The texture is just there for fun if we decide to put some hairs in. But it's not going to make or break the portrait. If anything, it just creates a point of distraction. There we go. I needed that to turn. Be very careful here. I think I'm gonna avoid toning that in. The moment I do that, for a moment I might feel like I've captured what I'm seeing, but I will have cost myself the age of the sitter, and even though I do see values there that should require a little bit more deepening of value, I know that at the moment I do that, she's going to look 5-10 years older than she is, maybe 20 years older. And so it's very strategic for the portrait artist to watch out for those sensitive lines of age. You'll know where they are. They're the things you wouldn't want to pop out on yourself. This. Our culture, we start doing things to fight these effects the moment they show up. We all do. Be kind to your portrait sitter. And it's not so much about being kind. It's just not wanting to overage them. In a drawing, these lines, because ultimately a drawing is a graphic thing. And even though we're trying to create the illusion of form and sculpture here, the viewer can't help but read these as linear indications. And then they look overdone, they look over-sculpted, and they look heavier, and therefore the drawing looks older than you intended it to be. So I'm going to leave that just as is. I think that the contrast between the white chalk and the paper is just the right amount. It holds back on what I see. It simplifies it. It subdues it. It's still there, but it's not overdoing it. This whole plane of the eye facing away from the light source. Pulling over it with my finger a little bit. So if your hands are clean and dry, try using your finger, a dry finger, to just massage the powdery chalk a little bit. Okay, so there's her active eye. It's probably not 100% complete right now. I know from experience that, completion of this probably means completing this and this. And we all know from experience that when we do one thing, it causes us to reconsider the neighbor. So as I work a little bit more on these sections and these passages, I will invariably go back and reconsider how this looks. But I wanted you to see the process I went through to begin to render that eye. and all the different techniques that are involved with it. Suprapalpebral crease is what we've got right here. Remember, none of these lines are neutral curves. That means none of them hold an even rate of curvature, but rather they are all peak-specific curves. So think in terms of angles. Angle 1, angle 2, and try to keep your curves from becoming neutral, which means really any segment of a circle where the rate of curvature is the same across. All right, thanks very much, everybody.